Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 124th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this video, I'm going to talk about this kind of revelation that I had about death and how death serves universal evolution. But first, before talking about that topic, I'd just like to go back to something that I shared in the last video, which was this snake game that you all played on your Nokias, where, in order to get the full score and explore the entire screen, you had to go about it by a certain strategy and fill the screen in such a way that you'd explore all of it. And I want to give you an example of how that applied to our reality. For instance, if you build a house, you first lay the foundations and then you build that house on top of it, right? So that it's stable and doesn't crumble to the ground. And so there's a certain order in which you develop things so that they're stable, just as when you're playing the snake game, in order to explore the entirety of the screen, or this, being a symbol for the all, or everything, or God that wants to experience all that it is, there's a certain way of going about it. And here I'm giving the example of the different paradigms that humanity has gone through. So for instance, if you do things in a certain order, then they make sense. For instance, if you first lay the foundations of science and materialism, and then on top of it, you put spirituality and all your shamans and whatever, and your, all of the Indian or tribal sort of belief systems, that works, because then via science you have this kind of, this quantum concepts and whatnot, to justify the existence of all these things, but in a kind of non-physical realm. But the opposite wouldn't work. Like, for instance, if you'd put spirituality as the foundations on top of which to build reality, that wouldn't work. Because imagine if actually your belief systems in spirits and all that stuff, you believe them to be as physical or as real or in the same dimension as you are right now, then this would completely collapse, basically. It's like mixing up, for instance, unicorns and dragons and dropping them into the physical world and trying to have that kind of mix between this and biology and create a balanced ecosystem. So you cannot, for instance, give a physical embodiment to demons, for instance. I don't think that would work. Like if you'd actually manifest demons in the physical and gave them a real embodiment. And you see, all of the evolution of the different paradigms we went through was adapted specifically in this kind of snake-like fashion so that the all could explore all that it is without breaking the experience, without hitting a wall here and that's the end and game over. So imagine if, of course, the bigger the human network, the power of the human network, humans basically, because they're the bridge between the material and non-material world, because we are what allows to bring ideas, to give ideas a physical form, to manifest them in physicality. Like, for instance, you first think of a house as an idea, and then through humans it becomes real. Imagine if with our belief system in monotheism or evil spirits of nature or whatever, we gave, as the human network grew, we would give them physical form. We'd manage to believe in them so much that they would actually manifest. Do you think we'd still be here talking about this? Which is why, the snake game, you have to really play it in a certain order. Hence why it was important first to lay the foundations of science and materiality, and then bend the rules of science gradually by building something on top of it, which would, become more and more complex, and we'll sort of use this whole quantum thing about everything being energy and everything being a vibration, to gradually integrate some of these things into our reality in a very, very gentle way, and learn to interact with all of these things, be it spirits or whatever, in being this bridge between the material and the non-material at a steady pace so that we can integrate them in a harmonious way, and with our consciousness becoming, how should I say, capable of integrating them. So you lay the foundations, for instance, and you build a shack first, and then you build a bigger house, a mansion, and then eventually you can build a skyscraper, which was unimaginable for people that were building houses 500 years ago. Well, maybe 500 years ago with cathedrals. They had this idea of grandeur, but still, I mean, at a certain point in time, humans would have never imagined to be able to build such sophisticated buildings. And that's the whole point, right? Is that you find the right strategy to explore all that is, and there are certain steps and, well, ways to go about it, where some things have to come first and some things have to come after. Now, the topic of this video, death and evolution. So I had this revelation basically that, well, first of all, if you looked at some of my other videos, you'd understand that any form is basically the result of two consciousnesses. So for the human, for instance, you have two consciousnesses, one that comes from zero, one that comes from infinity. So infinity is all that has to compress itself and limit itself to become a human. And it goes through all kinds of intermediary steps in compressing itself. And then you have nothingness, which has to build itself up to match the human. And so this goes from basically atoms and molecules and living cells, and build itself up. It's like going from past to present, if you will. And so your body, your physical body, has your entire history, holds the entire history of the universe and that kind of wisdom. And then your mind is like a compression of infinity to limit it into a human kind of consciousness. So your mind is almost like a process of forgetting. So when you're developing in the womb here, you're remembering. It's like you're remembering all the stages that it took to get to where you are. And so you have this accumulated wisdom of everything that you've been through in the physical, all of the history of the universe, if you will. And when you're going down from infinity, you're forgetting, you're putting layers of forgetfulness on the advanced being that you are in order to match your current incarnation as a human. And those two kind of mingle and mix, and to form like a very unique kind of blend, which gives you a unique personality, unique everything. And it's kind of neutral force, which ultimately is what free will is this kind of balance between, the perfect balance between remembering and forgetting, the perfect balance between going from here, future, to present, back in time, if you will. Where you could go either way. You're very free to sort of navigate this and just go, for instance, revisit some old traumas and advance your consciousness and then go back again. And what I wanted to say is that what happens in death is a very interesting process, because these two consciousnesses then separate again and split. It's like almost the individual cells, so your body is goes in one direction, and all the different cells is kind of split into all its different parts. And so you have these individual cells in your body, which are still alive, of course, not your global organism, that's dead, but the individual parts and cells in your body are still alive, and they resume a life in a dimension which is like a step down from humans, but they still carry the wisdom of the body and all it's been through, and almost serves as a way of evolving biology in another dimension. Like, for instance, imagine that humans are in the dimension between biology and the world of ideas. So we're right in the middle, we're the bridge. And then there is a dimension below you, which is the dimension of biology. And when you die, the wisdom that you've accumulated in your body, that consciousness then gets broken down and identifies again with like the cells or the parts, and that experience contributes to the evolution of biology. And of course, then there's another part of you which separates, like the mind, or whatever you want to call it, your astral body or your energetic body, what emotional body, whatever you want to call it. I don't really have a precise term for it. But basically the consciousness that goes towards infinity as opposed to going towards nothingness. You wake up as, say, I don't know, like an angel or something. And that also is this kind of evolutionary process where in my model of the universe, you'll understand that ultimately the universe just structures itself around key ideas, which are gateways between different worlds. So you have like the star, the living cell, the human, and all of these are bridges between different dimensions, between the world of physics and chemistry, between the world of chemistry and biology, between the world of biology and ideas, or 5D. And ultimately, all you need for the universe is these key forms, which actually are formless. It's just like, it's almost like octaves, on a piano. You just have different notes that vibrate at different frequencies, and every note sort of contains all the harmonics of all the other notes that are in between. And it's almost like when a note dies, part of it gets lowered, or part of that consciousness is separated. So the consciousness is separated into one that goes towards higher vibrations or towards infinity, and the other one that goes towards lower vibrations, which is towards nothingness. And so they create the notes in between, and they create the notes above it. And so you could imagine that there's also something here, which I don't know really what it is, that is the bridge between the world of ideas and the world beyond imagination. This is the world of imagination. Everything that humans can hold in their imagination is here. And then there is something which is the bridge to something that we will never be able to imagine, beyond imagination. And there's an entity or being here that is really pure. And in between here, you have all the intermediary steps, which are created by this being dying, quote unquote, and manifesting something here, a note, and a human dying and part of its consciousness ascending and creating another note here. And so you populate the entire scale from just these core ideas, which is all that really exists in the beginning. Just like it says in the Bible, like God just creates a certain number of things. Actually doesn't really need to create animals and all that stuff, because what happens is when a human dies, part of its consciousness is going to almost like, so part of the consciousness is going to inform the form below it of its form, and so this is going to try to match that by evolving to it, and that will create like an ape. And then when the ape dies, then that separates into like a rodent and a Homo habilis or something. And when the rodent dies, then part of its consciousness is going to become a jellyfish, and part of it's going to become like a more advanced mammal, like a wolf or something. I mean, you get the picture basically, is that it's this fractal thing where the universe populates itself with key forms or ideas, which are just notes or vibrations, key vibrations on a scale, because everything is a vibration ultimately. And the very first thing that the universe does is create harmony with all of these, with these vibrations basically, which scale upward And the first sort of natural harmony that is attained is a musical kind of harmony. And there you have all of your scales, all of your notes, basically, and especially the octaves. So what am I getting to? So imagine that during the life of a human being, that human being had plenty of ideas, right? Because we're the bridge between, again, the world of biology, which is here, and the world of ideas and imagination, which is here. All of the ideas that that human had have a life of their own. It's like you're creating these entities or these notes here. You're adding things in between you and whatever is the bridge between that being that is beyond that goes towards a world that is beyond imagination. And you're creating intermediary steps, just like all the intermediary steps that exist between a living cell and a human. All of the intermediary steps, like pluricellular organisms, jellyfish, rodents, apes, prehistoric men, and etc. And so all of the thoughts that you had, you will get to experience them or embody them once you're out of the body. Like your mind basically now is going to go into all of the things that you've imagined and experience them and live through them and have an experience like an angel interacting. If you thought about an angel and you thought about a demon, well, you're going to embody all of these ideas and have them like interact with each other and see what comes out of that. And again, when the angel, quote unquote, dies, or basically when because again, it's always a marriage between a consciousness that is scaling down from infinity towards the angel and scaling up from zero towards an angel. Every single entity, to me, is a mix between two consciousnesses, two sort of main elements in consciousness. The first polarization of the universe, which is nothing and everything. Everything is a mix between nothing and everything at a different scale. So some have more of infinity, and so their consciousness is more sort of envelops more of the universe, is closer to infinity, and some is closer to nothingness, but ultimately always have a mix of the two. And so the angel, once that dies, then it, like part of that consciousness which is separated from that, creates a more evolved human, and part of the angel then ascends to higher realms, whatever that angel had as thoughts or something, or its life experience. Whenever it's out of that body, then it's going to go into even more evolved forms, the forms that it had thought about at that level of evolution, which is something that is probably beyond human imagination. I mean, what do angels think about? Now, obviously, angels is probably not a good idea, because many people say that they are entities that they're not really creative or whatever. They're just there to help humans. And that's probably because obviously they are a thought form created by our collective minds and consciousnesses, which create these entities to help us then in our own reality. And you have that feedback loop of you actually then incarnate the human when you're out of your body. You can choose to incarnate the idea that you yourself created to help yourself. And so when I'm saying that the universe, that everything creates everything else, I literally mean everything creates everything else. Like we create with our ideas, consciousness and thought and whatever, we create all of the intermediary steps between us and whatever is beyond us. And then we get to incarnate those things, and those things, when they die, they help us evolve further. And it's like this constant feedback loop, you see, between the whatever best ideas we can think about of whatever's beyond us, God or angels or entities, Jesus, Christ consciousness, anything you can think about, that is all of the ideas that we've ever had as humanity, from the very beginning of the very first person that had a very first idea or thought. Once every single human left their bodies, they entered into those thought forms that they've created, incarnated them. Those thought forms interacted with each other, evolving in their own realm, And then that interaction then goes back to sort of feed humanity with its wisdom, thought forms interacting with other thought forms. And so the entire universe evolves like this simultaneously, where everything helps everything evolve. Through this process also of separation, everything splits. Like whenever a star dies, an evolution of the part that's the evolution of the star is like the planet is basically an evolved star in a way. And part of that star then goes back to atoms, but informs those atoms to be more evolved in their own way and behaving even better and making even better links, becoming even brighter stars or more evolved stars in the future. And again, like really everything evolves in this kind of way, in a fractal way, and everything splits like this all the time. Every time a structure or a form or an entity, quote unquote, dies or is dissolved, or that basically death is simply the separation between this mix of the two different consciousnesses. When the consciousness, which is stepping down from infinity into a form, and the consciousness which is stepping up from nothingness into a form, when those two consciousnesses split again, that's death, which is basically two births, if you will. So any death actually is the rebirth of two forms. One is the birth of, it's almost like your individual cells of your body sort of wake up from a dream of being a human, and then they realize, oh, actually we're separate. And they sort of resume their lives as separate cells, but keeping all the wisdom that you've accumulated during your life, which helps the world of biology evolve. And then a birth of a mind that is now free of the body, that gets to embody all the thought forms that you've ever created during your lifetime, saying, oh, this is all the stuff that I've sort of prepared for myself after my death experience that I can get to choose from. Oh, that's so interesting. I'm going to play to, I've spent most of my lifetime as a human thinking about angels. Well, you know what? I'm going to embody an angel and see what that looks like as an experience and grow into that, grow through that as an angel in that kind of realm. And that helps raise my consciousness in the immaterial and then go back to the material. And that's your teeter-totter or feedback loop, where it results in this kind of evolution, but where everything evolves at the same time, and you don't have this linear evolution. You only have the illusion of linear evolution if you look at it from a linear time-space continuum. But on the whole, everything evolves at the same time in this kind of fractal logic where everything splits all the time. And then obviously when you have a birth at the human level, then you have two deaths, if you will. Or, well, it's not really two deaths. It's almost like a remembering and a forgetting, and then here you have like a so if this is forgetting, then death is remembering, the mind remembers. And if this is remembering, when you're born, going from zero to the human, then this is forgetting. Like your cells basically forget that they're part of the global collective organisms, and your mind remembers now that it is more than just a body. So I hope you understand how death, quote unquote, which isn't really death, serves the whole purpose of evolution. The first, quote unquote, structure or entity in the universe, which was humanoid in its characteristics, that is basically just simply a creature that was capable of creating or thinking about ideas. At that point, anything that first human thought about would populate what is here in between. Then he'd get to incarnate it after he died, and that made that thought form evolve, and that also then helped humanity evolve further. And so this is one thing that why I'm talking about this, is that in many books you have all kinds of wild stories about how this reality came about, and with all kinds of stories of like gods and the whole creative process for creating our holographic reality and all that stuff. And that's all very true, but that is the story of how infinity sort of limited itself and structured itself down from infinity in order to get to the human, and all the intermediary steps have been populated by human thought also. You see, it's almost like infinity, when it structures itself down towards the human, first it only has these quote these octaves to jump, and then as the universe sort of embodies these different forms, which is the living cell, the human, the star, it populates all of these things in between, and then it goes through that story of limitation. It goes through all of these things that were created by the human mind, and then those things that were created by the human mind have their own thoughts and stuff that create also other things that are beyond the human mind, and they also create the human in return. And so it's not that these stories are not true. It's not that, but I just find them, many people are obsessed with them because they believe this is more true than this story. And actually, what's really important is to really be centered in where you are as a human and not be too obsessed with the process of infinity, like limiting itself in order to reach towards the human and swallowing up that story as being true. Ultimately, how should I say this? If you believe what I'm saying right now, and I think I'm quite serious about this, then all the thoughts and ideas you have about the universe, all the thought forms that you create, will be waiting for you once you leave your body, or even if you take your body with you. For instance, if you quote unquote ascend, then you'll get to play with all of the thought forms that you've ever created as a human from your human vantage point. So, do you want to just swallow whatever story is the resultant of a certain stage in the evolution of human consciousness and thought forms, or a certain portion of this, which maybe was created by other humans that you're not even aware of? For instance, all the people that are channeling how this universe was created and how we got to be on the planet, that may be a coagulation or one story of going from infinity towards the human, one specific one, with a compilation of all the different thought forms of certain humans. And that is no more true than another story which may be here, or another story which may be here. And so the luxury that we have is, with this kind of understanding, is to get to pick the model or the thought forms that you want waiting for you for your next quote-unquote embodiment, or what your consciousness can grow into once it leaves your body, and that it can sort of play with. And that can be whatever some channelers are presenting to you. Why not? Of course. But it's about espousing this idea that we are creators, or this idea that we're God-man, as some channelers are sort of saying. We're growing into becoming God-man. But who tells God what to think? Who tells God what is the truth? I mean, who does God go to and says, what do I do? I mean, what's the truth? Tell me. Well, a God doesn't ask anyone. A God asks himself. I mean, if we're serious about this, then God is it's something that creates itself and doesn't need any sort of external validation for thinking something, for having an idea about something, for creating something. And so this model here that I'm presenting to you gives you much more freedom, which can be absolutely exhilarating, but also extremely stressful, because ultimately it isn't telling you that what's waiting for you in the afterlife is reincarnation, or becoming your higher self, or becoming God and being reunited with the all. It tells you that whatever you've been thinking as a human during your life and all the thought forms that you had is almost like preparing your future body or your future experience, which is your own personal, how should I say? It's almost as if ultimately the consciousness wants to espouse infinity again, go back to infinity. And it has to create these kind of steps for the remembering, like different musical notes that you have to go through. And you, in your own embodiment as a human, your thought forms, your belief systems, everything that you believe about what happens after death is like you preparing the obstacles that you'll have to overcome and grow through in order to get back to remembering infinity. Because otherwise it'd be too easy, right? You just like pop out of the human consciousness and whoops, and you're directly in infinity. But you're not growing into infinity. You're just instantly becoming infinity, which there's no point in that, really. It's like, imagine you had like a symphony where you start with like the one chord, and then there's a whole progression of chords before going to the end of the symphony and you just have the same chord. That's basically the structure of any classical symphony, is you start with a chord like, say, a C major, and the last chord is also going to be C major. And as I've said in various videos, nothingness and everything are one and the same ultimately. And then in between those two chords, you have plenty of different things. Like you go through, minor chords, and you go through G major, but then you go to A minor, and etc. Maybe you do like a variation, something. And that's what's the beauty of it. It's when you go to you return to your initial state, but there were so many awesome things in between, right? And so in this idea, what I'm trying to get to is that we have ultimately the freedom to choose the obstacles or the forms that it's not really obstacles, but it's like the forms that we want to grow into and then transcend in our way back towards infinity as that consciousness. We have that luxury as humans. And that's why, I think it's quite important actually to becoming consciously aware of and consciously pick your belief systems, your ideas, your thought forms, because they are your creations. They're the creations of your mind, and perhaps once your mind is out of your body, then it is free to sort of adhere to or experience all those things that you've created for yourself while in embodiment. And the reason for that is when you're not in a body, well, if you can manifest anything for yourself, where would the motivation for you to come up with wanting to have a certain experience come from? Whereas when you're in this limited state as a human, then you dream of being an angel, you dream of flying in the sky, you dream of being free, you dream of being a god, you dream of being all these things that you're not. But if you already are infinite and you can actually come up and do anything, then you will not have the will to create. And so the human is this very particular form, essential form for the universe, and being this bridge between biology and the world of ideas, because from this limited biological and material state, that is what gives us the motivation to be creators, which you wouldn't have if you didn't have this limitation in embodiment. But you can be unconscious creators. That is, you can create thought forms for yourself that you have to sort of clean up after. It's almost like you've how should I put this? It's almost as if you had the realm of ideas was a dimension, and from your human perspective, all your life, you were like popping things here. Like imagine this room, and you were throwing things into that room. Like sometimes when you accumulate junk and you throw things into a giant room or warehouse for you to say, oh, I'll sort that later. And when you die, when you leave embodiment, then your mind goes into this giant warehouse where you have all of the thought forms that you've ever thought during your life. And now you have the opportunity to play with them. But, it's a bit messy, right? Because you were creating unconsciously, and so you were just like throwing anything in there. Polytheism and all kinds of vengeful gods and evil spirits of nature and whatever. And you as an unlimited being that is no longer limited by the mind, you get to play around with all these ideas, embody them, and they interact with each other. They become alive, basically, through your own consciousness that sort of goes into them. And of course, that interaction then helps evolve everything else and evolves into something new also beyond the world of ideas. But what's magical is that once you start creating consciously, you stop being this kind of person that throws objects into a warehouse saying, I'm going to deal with that later. But you're actually stacking and preparing these ideas very neatly, saying, oh, wouldn't it be great if I want to actually experience this and this and this. And I'm preparing that for myself. I find that these thought forms are really, really fascinating, and I want to explore these once I'm out of the body. And that'd be really great if I could play with this one, and this one. I don't want to play with the demon because that's overrated. I've done that already probably. I don't want to fuss around with angels. They've already experienced themselves. And I'm not really too much into ETs because I know what they are. There are already so many people playing around. But what about this very interesting thought form? What about that one? And that can be anything. But just understand that growing into this role of God-man or the conscious creator is what we're asked, or we're destined kind of to become, which will bring much more order to this realm of ideas, and which will, make it easier for the universe to evolve. That's just the idea of the universe evolving. So, sorry if maybe this wasn't very clear. Of course, I'm looking at my drawing now. It looks absolutely terrible. But I hope you got the gist of all of this. And of course, this was improv. So maybe I'll clarify in future videos. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave a comment. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll talk to you in the next video.